For 2 centuries, controlling a sea meant owning the biggest fleet on it. In the Western Black Sea, that rule just broke, and it broke without a single Ukrainian warship leaving harbor. Retention. Checkpoint. 000 hook. 100 million tons of cargo. Grain, sunflower oil, iron ore, moving through a shipping lane that, on paper, did not exist. Because on paper, Russia's Black Sea fleet controlled those waters. Dozens of surface combatants, shore-based anti-ship systems, a naval base at Sevastopol dating to 1783, and a formal declaration, issued in July 2023, that no vessel could safely transit to Ukrainian ports. The declaration died on the data. A $250,000 drone boat against a $70 million warship. That asymmetry is the whole story of this war at sea, and the next 20 minutes will show you exactly how it works, layer by layer, until the math stops making sense for the bigger fleet. Retention. Checkpoint. 030 hook resolution Ts. The answer to how Ukraine runs an open shipping lane through a hostile sea is not a navy. It is 5 interlocking systems, each cheap enough to replace, each covering the gap the others leave open. Pull one out, and the corridor still holds. Destroy 2, and the economics still favor Kyiv. This is sea denial as architecture, and by the time we reach the 5th layer, the question won't be how Ukraine managed it. The question will be why every navy on Earth didn't see it coming. Let's start at the edge of the envelope. The R-360 Neptune is a subsonic anti-ship cruise missile with a publicly stated range of somewhere between 280 and 360 kilometers. Defense Express, the Kyiv-based defense publication with consistent sourcing on Ukrainian weapons development, has reported the extended-range variant pushing toward that outer figure. Naval News tracked the deployment pattern, coastal batteries along the Odessa and Mykolaiv regions, with overlapping coverage arcs that push any Russian surface combatant east of the 34th meridian before it can close on the corridor. What does the 34th meridian mean in practice? It means the Western Black Sea, the operating area that matters for Odessa-bound shipping, is empty of Russian warships. Not because Ukraine sank all of them, though the fleet's losses have been significant. Because the Neptune's reach makes any Russian surface combatant operating west of that line a target the moment it's detected. The math of exposure time versus reaction time simply doesn't favor the ship. Russian naval planners understood this after April 2022. The cruiser Moskva, the fleet's flagship, was struck by 2 Neptune missiles northwest of Snake Island. The ship sank the following morning. That engagement didn't end the Black Sea Fleet's ambitions, but it established the Neptune as a fleet-level threat, not a coastal defense footnote. Every subsequent Russian sortie into the western operating area had to account for it. Retention. Checkpoint. 40 stakes bend. Here is where the standard analysis stops, and where the real architecture begins. Most coverage of Ukrainian sea denial focuses on the Neptune strike. It's dramatic. It has footage. It has a named victim. But the Neptune alone doesn't reopen a shipping lane. A coastal missile battery is a deterrent. It pushes ships east. It doesn't prevent a fleet from operating at distance and still threatening corridor traffic with longer-range systems, submarines or mines. To actually run a shipping corridor through contested waters, Ukraine needed to solve a different problem. What happens when the Russian fleet decides to operate from range and accept the exposure risk? The answer was already in the water before anyone publicly recognized the second layer. The Magura V5 first appeared in documented operational footage in late 2022. A surface drone roughly 5 meters long, low to the waterline, shaped to minimize radar cross-section. The payload is in the bow, impact detonated, with a warhead that HUR, Ukraine's Military Intelligence Directorate, hasn't officially specified, but that post-strike analysis from H.I. Sutton at Covert Shores has assessed as consistent with a shaped charge capable of breaching a warship's hull at or below the waterline. The V5 is not a precision weapon. It doesn't need to be. Its operational logic is different from a missile's. A missile is fired at a ship. A drone swarm surrounds one. Multiple Magura V5 units operating in a coordinated group force the targeted vessel into a defensive posture that consumes crew attention, ammunition, and maneuver. The ship's close-in weapons systems, deck guns, and counter-drone measures are finite. They can engage a certain number of targets per minute. If the number of inbound drones exceeds that rate, or if the approach geometry forces the ship to defend multiple vectors simultaneously, the probability of at least one impact climbs towards certainty. What's most surprising about this system isn't the drone itself, it's the operational scale Ukraine achieved. By early 2025, open-source analysis from Covert Shores documented a Magura fleet large enough that Russian naval operations in the Western Black Sea required planning for swarm engagement before any sortie. Not occasionally, every sortie. A Russian patrol ship leaving Sevastopol toward the shipping corridor had to assume it would face USVs before it reached operating depth. That assumption changes how crews behave, it changes how commanders plan, and it changes the political calculus of ordering ships into contested water at all. By mid-2025, the Sea Baby, a larger, heavier USV variant, reportedly capable of carrying a more substantial payload, had appeared in operational footage verified by OSINT analysts tracking Ukrainian naval drone activity. Her briefings, relayed through Ukrainian defense media, referenced the Sea Baby's use in attacks against Russian naval and logistics infrastructure. The progression from V5 to Sea Baby isn't incidental. It reflects an iterative development cycle. Test the concept, identify the limits, build the next version. The fleet Ukraine cannot replace. It is manufacturing. Microfinal at ROP 5 Minin mark. The Neptune pushed the Russian fleet east. The USV swarm made every sortie a fight. But neither system alone answers the question any serious naval planner asks immediately. How do you find the ship in the first place? Detection is the precondition for everything that follows. A missile with 360 kilometers of range is useless without a firing solution. A drone swarm is useless without coordinates. The third layer of Ukraine's sea denial architecture is the one that makes the other two lethal, and it's built almost entirely from components Ukraine didn't develop itself. Planet Labs operates a constellation of commercial Earth observation satellites capable of imaging any point on the planet's surface multiple times per day. ICEYE, a Finnish company, operates synthetic aperture radar satellites that can image through cloud cover and at night. Both companies have provided data access to Western partners who in turn share processed imagery with Ukrainian military users. The arrangement isn't officially detailed in public releases, but UK defense intelligence updates, NATO partner briefings relayed through defense media, and Ukrainian official statements have all referenced satellite-enabled targeting as a component of Ukrainian maritime operations. The practical effect? A Russian warship that leaves Sevastopol Bay can be imaged within hours. Its heading, speed, and likely destination can be derived from sequential imagery. The data reaches Ukrainian targeting cells fast enough to be operationally useful. This is near real-time hull tracking without a single Ukrainian reconnaissance satellite. It's assembled from commercial infrastructure, partner intelligence sharing, and Ukrainian analytical capacity, and Russia can't match it. Russia's domestic satellite reconnaissance capability for maritime targeting in the Black Sea isn't absent, but it operates at lower revisit rates, lower resolution, and without the commercial network redundancy that makes Western partner imagery so hard to suppress or spoof. The gap isn't in Ukraine's favor by a small margin. The gap is structural. Russia built a fleet to fight a Cold War adversary with similar sensor limitations. Ukraine built a targeting network using systems that didn't exist 15 years ago. Fruck! Retention, checkpoint, 50% mid-roll hook. Put yourself in the position of the Russian fleet commander in Sevastopol in the summer of 2024. The Neptune has already killed your flagship. Your surface combatants can't safely operate west of a line that bisects your operational area. Every sortie faces USV engagements before it reaches the corridor. And you know, or you strongly suspect, that your movements are being tracked by satellites your signals intelligence units cannot jam, because the satellites belong to private companies operating under multiple national jurisdictions. What do? The historical answer to coastal missile threat was to use the fleet's range. Operate from distance, strike from beyond the defensive envelope. The Black Sea's geography makes that difficult. It's an enclosed sea. The distances aren't large, and the Neptune's range has apparently grown since the first public specifications. The answer the Black Sea Fleet chose, increasingly, was to stay in port. Ship tracking data from AIS, commercial vessel monitoring, and OSINT satellite imagery showed a consistent pattern through 2024 and into 2025. Russian surface combatants, particularly the larger frigates and landing ships that represent the fleet's amphibious capacity, spending extended periods at berth in Sevastopol and Novorossiysk. Not on patrol, not on exercise, at anchor. What looks like a fleet in being is, operationally, a fleet in hiding. Russian milbloggers, the pro-war telegram channels that operate with apparent access to military sources and often acknowledge battlefield realities before official statements do, began noting the fleet's limited activity through 2024. Some framed it as strategic repositioning, some acknowledged the USV threat explicitly, none disputed the basic operational reality: the Black Sea Fleet was not controlling the Western operating area. Here is the take that will probably generate pushback. The Russian Black Sea Fleet, as a sea control force, effectively ceased to function in its intended role before it was formally degraded through attrition. The ships still existed, the hulls were still afloat, but a navy that can't operate in its own theater without accepting unacceptable engagement risk is not a navy performing its mission. It's infrastructure waiting for a solution that isn't coming. Viewer question/Block F. What would you do as that fleet commander? Hold position in Novorossiysk under land-based air defense cover, or sortie into the corridor and accept the USV gauntlet? That's not a rhetorical question. The decision tree is genuinely difficult, and the wrong choice in either direction costs ships. Drop your answer in the comments. We read them. Microfinal at DH1000 mark. It can still interfere with corridor traffic through long-range missile attack, mining operations, or submarine activity. Ukraine needed to convert sea denial, keeping the Russian fleet from operating freely, into something the global shipping market would treat as equivalent to sea control. That conversion happened through an instrument nobody expected: war risk insurance pricing. Lloyd's of London and the broader marine insurance market price war risk premiums based on actuarial assessment of threat, not on political statements, not on official declarations of safe passage or its absence, on the observed frequency and severity of attacks on commercial shipping in a defined zone over a defined period. Russia declared in July 2023 that vessels transiting to Ukrainian ports could be considered legitimate military targets. The declaration was real. Several Ukrainian-flagged and third-country vessels operating in the corridor region were struck or damaged in the months that followed. But the pattern of attacks against commercial shipping didn't sustain the level that would justify the premiums Russia's declaration implied. The Neptune batteries held their coverage. The USV envelope prevented Russian surface units from prosecuting close-range attacks on grain carriers. The satellite network meant Ukrainian air defense and strike assets had advance warning of Russian maritime movements. Reuters and Lloyd's List both tracked the subsequent premium movement. War risk premiums into Odessa, which had spiked dramatically after Russia's July 2023 announcement, fell roughly 70% from their 2023 peaks by mid-2024. The fall accelerated as the USV envelope demonstrated sustained coverage, approximately 90 days of uninterrupted corridor operation without a successful attack on a corridor transiting commercial vessel. The shipping industry reads premium data as operational signal. When Lloyd's prices a route as manageable, commercial operators follow. When it prices a route as prohibitive, they don't, regardless of what either government says about safety. Ukraine won the insurance argument, and the insurance argument won the corridor.
Oh!
Block C. Personal narrator phrase. Research angle. I spent considerable time going through the Lloyd's List coverage from the second half of 2023 through early 2025, and one pattern kept standing out. The premium movements tracked USV operational tempo almost exactly. When Ukrainian drone activity in the corridor region was documented, attacks, interceptions, footage appearing in OSINT channels, premiums moved within weeks. The market was reading the same OSINT the analysts were reading. The corridor didn't reopen because Russia gave permission. It reopened because the math changed. By the time Ukrainian grain exports through Odessa crossed the 100 million ton threshold in the corridor's first sustained operational year, the premium movement had become self-reinforcing. Lower premiums brought more vessels created more political and economic pressure against interference, more traffic normalized the route in ways that made Russian attacks on commercial shipping more diplomatically costly. The fifth layer completes the architecture, and it's the one Ukraine didn't build at all. The Montreux Convention of 1936 governs transit through the Turkish Straits, the Bosphorus, and the Dardanelles. For naval vessels, it establishes rules with significant practical consequences for the Black Sea situation. Warships belonging to non-Black Sea nations are subject to tonnage limits and advance notification requirements for transit. More importantly, in time of war involving a Black Sea state, Turkey, as the controlling power, has the authority to close the straits to belligerent warships. Following Russia's full-scale invasion in February 2022, Turkey invoked this authority. Russian warships cannot reinforce the Black Sea fleet through the Bosphorus. Vessels that were in the Black Sea at the time of closure remain there. Vessels based in other fleets, the Northern Fleet, the Pacific Fleet, the Baltic Fleet, cannot transit south to reinforce. The Black Sea Fleet is a closed system. Every hull lost is a hull that cannot be replaced from outside. Every ship that retreats to Novorossiysk to avoid the Neptune envelope is a ship that cannot be swapped out for a fresh unit from another theater. Obstacle plus resolution. The mine threat. This is not to say the corridor operated without friction. It didn't. The Black Sea mine situation remained a consistent obstacle through 2024 and into 2025. Mines, both legacy Soviet-era weapons and more recently emplaced ordnance, had been reported drifting in Black Sea shipping lanes following the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam and other flood events. Commercial vessels transiting the corridor required mine-sweeping coordination and route adjustment to avoid documented mine drift patterns. Ukrainian and partner naval mine countermeasure assets, combined with route monitoring by the international shipping community and the Danube Corridor Navigation Services, developed a working protocol. Vessels would transit designated swept lanes during daylight hours, with updated hazard coordinates distributed through maritime safety broadcasts. It wasn't a perfect solution. It added time and coordination overhead to every transit, but it didn't close the corridor. The mine problem, like the USV swarm problem and the satellite tracking problem, had a workable answer. The workable answers accumulated into a system. Microfinal at -15 min-mark. Now consider what Ukraine had assembled by the end of 2024. Neptune batteries covering the western operating area. A USV fleet large enough to force every Russian sortie into a swarm engagement. Commercial satellite imagery providing near real-time hull tracking. Insurance market pricing that treated the corridor as open for business, and the Montreux Convention sealing the fleet's losses as permanent. None of these 5 elements is, individually, a navy. None of them is a warship. The most expensive single component, the Neptune missile, costs a fraction of the warship it threatens. What Ukraine built was the first fully documented example of sea denial replacing sea control as a functional strategic outcome. Not a theoretical exercise from a think tank. Not a wargame scenario. A working maritime corridor, with commercial traffic, with insurance coverage, with verified cargo tonnage, running through waters nominally controlled by a hostile surface fleet that could not actually use them. Block D. Authorial opinion. What strikes us about this architecture is not any single component. It's the compounding. Each layer of the denial system makes the others more effective. The Neptune pushes ships into closer operating areas where USVs are more effective. The satellite network makes the Neptune more lethal by providing targeting data. The USV pressure validates the satellite data by forcing Russian ships to maneuver in detectable ways. The insurance market reads all of it and prices accordingly. The Montreux closure prevents any external reset. Every navy that fought the last century built toward sea control, the ability to operate surface ships freely in a defined area and deny that operation to the enemy. Ukraine proved that a state with no meaningful surface fleet could achieve a functionally equivalent outcome at a fraction of the cost, using systems that were either commercially available, relatively cheap to manufacture at scale, or provided by partners. The doctrine implications are still being processed in naval staffs from Washington to Tokyo to New Delhi. Block C. Personal narrator phrase. Most surprising. What's most surprising about this case isn't that Ukraine found a way to run the corridor. It's that the solution was assembled from components that each seemed insufficient in isolation. A coastal missile that had never sunk a ship in combat before April 2022. Drone boats that looked, to many analysts, like a niche capability with limited operational scale. Commercial satellite imagery designed for agricultural monitoring and land survey. An insurance market responding to actuarial data rather than geopolitical statements. None of those components was a naval revolution on its own. Combined and layered, they produced one. The Russian Black Sea Fleet didn't fail because it was outgunned by a more powerful navy. It failed because it was operating in a threat environment designed around its own vulnerabilities, and it couldn't adapt faster than Ukraine could iterate. Block G. Engagement hook. We cut the detailed chronology of specific corridor closing incidents from this analysis for length. If you want a breakdown of the individual engagements that proved each layer of the denial system, comment more below and we'll build that episode. Retention. Checkpoint. Last 60s. The lesson every naval staff is working through right now is not specific to Ukraine or to the Black Sea. It is a geometry problem. If a coastal missile battery with commercially available targeting data can threaten a surface combatant at 360 kilometers, and if a swarm of $250,000 drone boats can force that same warship into a defensive posture it cannot sustain, and if the entire kill chain from detection to impact can be run for a cost per engagement 2 orders of magnitude cheaper than the target, then sea control, as historically practiced, requires either overwhelming numerical superiority or acceptance of continuous attrition at unfavorable exchange rates. Neither option is politically sustainable for a fleet operating in a contested littoral zone against an adversary that has demonstrated the will to use these methods. This is what sea denial looks like in the drone age, and why tonnage alone no longer controls a coast. Retention. Checkpoint. Identity/understanding at 16-17K. Subscribe to Navy Redo so you don't miss the next stage of this analysis. The Russian fleet is attempting to adapt, moving logistics infrastructure further east, experimenting with drone countermeasures, and accepting the strategic trade-off of ceding the western Black Sea in exchange for preserving remaining hulls. Whether that adaptation holds is the next question, and the sea keeps shrinking around it. The forward questions follow naturally from the architecture we just walked through. Can the big deck carrier survive a sea where 1,000 cheap drones can be in the water before the first one is seen? The carrier's defenders will point to its air wing, its escort destroyers, its layered defense in depth. The skeptics will run the exchange rate math and note that the economics of saturation attack have only improved since 2022. There is no settled answer, but the Black Sea proved the question is real, not theoretical. Retention. Checkpoint. Historical/forward. Question 19.5-21K. Second question. The Montreux Convention protected Ukraine's denial system by preventing Russian naval reinforcement. What happens when the next sea denial conflict occurs in a geography without a treaty choke point? The Red Sea, the South China Sea, the Persian Gulf, none of them have a Montreux equivalent. A sea denial architecture in those theaters would face an adversary that can reinforce, resupply, and rotate hulls from outside the contested area. Does the layered denial system still hold? Third question. The commercial satellite network was a critical enabler, but it depends on companies operating under multiple national jurisdictions maintaining their data-sharing arrangements under political pressure. Russia has made diplomatic efforts to restrict that access. Future sea denial architectures may face a targeting network that degrades under political rather than military pressure. These aren't rhetorical closings. They are the real open questions in current naval doctrine literature, and the Black Sea corridor is the case study every analyst is using to try to answer them. The purpose of this analysis is not to glorify war at sea, but to understand the military and human realities behind it. Because the clearer we see modern naval conflict, the clearer the value of deterrence, stability, and the freedom of the seas becomes.